Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we're playing with models again and covering a topic that we've done in the past, but recently we've gotten a lot of questions about what BB means. In fact, it's one of the most commonly asked questions online. When you type in things about Battleship, one of the first things that comes up is, what does BB mean related to Battleship? We just hit our 100 millionth view on the channel, and so we're guessing that there's some folks out there who are relatively new to us. So, BB. It is part of an alphanumeric designator for ships' hull numbers. Ships don't officially receive their names until they're christened, and sometimes ships might even have their names changed. For example, the aircraft carrier known today as Yorktown CV-10 was once going to be called Bonhomme Richard. But hull numbers are less likely to change, and so each ship, in addition to its name, gets a hull number. Additionally, the Navy tends to reuse names for ships. For example, the third USS New Jersey is about to be commissioned. Well, how do you differentiate that New Jersey from this New Jersey, from the previous New Jersey, when you say USS New Jersey? And the short answer is hull numbers. The US Navy usually uses 2 or 3 letters and then a number, and the numbers are usually in ascending order for simplicity's sake. For example, the Navy's first battleship, USS Texas, not the one that's currently preserved as a museum, but an older type, received the hull number. Oh wait, she didn't get a hull number. But the Navy's second battleship, USS Indiana, received the hull number BB-1, so that everybody would remember that that is the second battleship that we built. BB just stands for battleship. I've heard it commonly said that because the Royal Navy used single-letter designators for their ships, they called them pennant numbers, that the US Navy went with the double-letter system. I'm not sure that that's accurate. It seems, especially since I'm not aware of the B letter being used in pennants, but quite frankly, the British system of how pennants work has changed significantly across the 20th and 21st century, and I can't keep it straight. Fortunately, while the US Navy's numbering system hasn't always been perfect, it's been relatively consistent. It seems to start around the foundation of the new Navy, around the 1880s or 90s time period. And originally, hull numbers would have been like cruiser number 1 would have been C1, but pretty early on, the Navy changes to the BB1, CA1, whatever the case may be. And we'll talk about what those are in a moment. And that really gave them the ability to add granularity. So for example, among cruisers, you have battle cruisers, armored cruisers, heavy cruisers, missile cruisers, nuclear cruisers, light cruisers, anti-aircraft cruisers, command cruisers, and probably a couple different types that I'm not thinking of right now. And so, by having a multi-letter designator, it was much easier to distinguish what those cruisers did. All of those ships are in the same alphanumeric sequence, although at a certain point the Navy chose to start back over again. So sometimes when the numbers get so high, they'll go back around to 1. Or sometimes, for example, destroyer hull numbers go up to, I think, 1,002 right now. But then they started back from 1 with guided missile destroyers. Whereas with cruisers, it doesn't always entirely make sense. For ships that do not have much granularity, like battleships, they usually just use double of the first letter. It would make sense for them to be BS, right? Well, BS means something else. So the Navy, perhaps wisely, perhaps just luckily, decided not to go with that. So they got BB. Cruisers had some granularity, so they got a couple different types. Destroyers started out without granularity, so they got DD. Likewise, submarines, SS. So I've got a small selection of Wayne Smith's model collection here These are all 1/1200 scale models. So this is the size these ships look in comparison to each other. So you can tell our Fletcher-class destroyer here, like Kidd, Cass and Young, or the Sullivans, is significantly smaller than an Iowa-class battleship. This is New Jersey in her 1968 configuration, specifically before she gets to Long Beach. This is how she looked when she was transiting the Panama Canal, with the ship's boats on there and the forward 40mm tubs not cut off yet. And it gives you an idea of the scale size of these ships. So destroyers tend to be on the smaller side during the years when this numbering system was first come up with. Next to New Jersey here, we have New Jersey, but older. So this is what the first USS New Jersey, battleship number 16, which remember, of course, means that she was the 17th battleship built for the US Navy. No idea why the first Texas didn't get a hull number. Oftentimes, the Navy would go back and reassign hull numbers to ships that had not originally been given them. So for example, the armored cruiser Maine, authorized at the same time as Texas, is made armored cruiser number 1. Even the sailing ship Constellation gets a hull number of IX-21. But poor Texas 1 doesn't get anything, so she's often referred to as BB0. But this gives you a perfect example of why hull numbers are important. Are you talking about BB-16 or BB-62? While they're both battleships, and they're only separated by about 30 or 40 years, there's a little bit of a difference between the two. Battleships tend to make sense. Destroyers tend to make sense. When we started to add granularity in destroyers, that was easy. The destroyer escorts just became DE, and they started with the whole new hull number. And then those evolved into the frigates, which just became FFs or FFGs. Cruisers are where it's complicated. It's practically everything that was a warship that wasn't a line of battleship was called a cruiser at one time. From colonial cruisers, which are just gunboats, roughly equivalent to a frigate in combat power, all the way up to aircraft carriers, start out as cruisers. So, first off, let's start with carriers then. They're the biggest ships in the fleet. C, from that cruiser legacy. V means heavier than aircraft. That is opposed to the Z random letter designator, which means lighter than aircraft, or the dirigibles. The W random letter designator means a Coast Guard cutter. Like, don't ask me why they came up with random letters. They seem to have started with C's and B's and D's, and then once they ran out of the commonly used ones, well, we can't call Coast Guard cutters cruisers too, so W. For example, Taney that I used to work on is WHEC 37 for Coast Guard High Endurance Cutter. Or during World War II, when she was used, when the Coast Guard was subsumed into the Navy, she was WPG 37 for Patrol Gunboat, which was an existing Navy classification, with the W in front of it to let you know that she was Coast Guard manned. But back to carriers. They were cruisers that carried heavier than aircraft. Why were they cruisers? Well, the first ships that the US Navy tested launching and recovering aircraft from were the armored cruisers. And then the fleet carriers were built off of the hulls of Lexington-class battle cruisers. So carriers come out of the cruiser design lineage. In those early days, cruisers came in either armored cruisers or protected cruisers. Olympia is a great example of a protected cruiser. She does not have an armored belt like a battleship or an armored cruiser, but she does have an armored deck. And that armored deck tends to curve like a turtle shell to provide some side protection as well. So she has protection, but not full armoring. She doesn't have an armored box built around her like a battleship. Protected cruisers evolve into light armored cruisers. They are essentially ships like armored cruisers, but they carry lighter guns, and so they have lighter armor plate. But now the armored plate is actually a belt with bulkheads and whatnot, like the armored ships. They just don't have that same level of armor. And from then on, it's the level of firepower, more so than anything else, that dictates whether a cruiser is light armored or heavy armored, which in the Washington Naval Treaty just becomes codified as heavy cruisers and light cruisers. So here we have two examples of World War II cruisers. This larger one is a Cleveland-class cruiser. She is a light cruiser. This slightly smaller one is a New Orleans-class cruiser. She is a heavy cruiser. Notice that the Cleveland has more guns, even though she is a light cruiser. She's heavier and she's longer. What is the difference? New Orleans has 9 8-inch guns. Cleveland has 12 6-inch guns. So light cruisers tend to be armed with 5 or 6-inch guns, especially during the World War II time period. During World War I, you still see some that are armed with 4-inch guns and other things. Some other countries, like Russia, has 7 or 7.5-inch guns. That probably means something in millimeters, but I don't speak the millimeter very well. Heavy cruisers tend to be 8-inch, or like German heavy cruisers are like 8.1 or 8.2-inch guns. Again, it probably means something in millimeters. So light cruisers retain the designator CL for cruiser light armored. Heavy cruisers have the designator CA for cruiser armored. The US Navy gave battle cruisers not the designator BC like you would think, like they came out of the battleship lineage, but the designator CC, which some have claimed means cruiser capital. Just means battle cruiser. It's not a perfect acronym. Post-war, the US Navy starts to add new propulsion types and new weapon systems, which they want to differentiate between their older ships and their newer ships. And so when ships have missiles added to them, keep in mind, oftentimes the earliest missile ships were World War II surplus ships that just had guns removed and missiles installed in their place. They tended to retain their original hull number, though not always. And they tended to retain part of their original designator, but they would get a G for guided missile. So for example, CGs are cruisers that carry guided missiles, like today's Ticonderoga class. And DDGs are destroyers with guided missiles. FFGs were frigates with guided missiles. On the other hand, we built ships with nuclear power. So a carrier with nuclear power is CV, cruiser, heavier than air, and then N, nuclear. Interestingly, aircraft carriers, whether they're nuclear or conventional, all tend to be numbered in the same system, while cruisers and destroyers tended to start over again when the new type was introduced. Ships like the cruiser Long Beach, that were both guided missile and nuclear powered, became CGNs. Honestly, I think I've confused everyone enough with this video, so we're not going to go into smaller ship types or auxiliaries. There is a truly endless number of these abbreviations, which sometimes form perfect acronyms, but often do not. So the short version is the BB doesn't stand for anything. It's battleship. It's not a perfect acronym. The second B doesn't mean anything. What's your favorite type of ship? Let us know in the comments section down below. But you have to let us know by its alphanumeric designator. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us in the channel. Thanks for watching.